In this lab, we're going to use sand, salt, and water in order to demonstrate several separation techniques: filtration, evaporation, and crystallization. We're going to start with a pea-sized amount of salt and a pea-sized amount of sand and observe it on some scrap paper and record the observations on the back of the paper. The back of the paper is like this. We're going to combine them into a mixture, record observations, put the mixture into a test tube, add some water, and then filter it, and so on. So let's go on and get started. So here we have our salt and our sand. We can make some observations of the salt. We can bring it into focus here. And I'm going to take a scoop of the salt and place it onto this paper. I'm also going to take a scoop of the sand and place it right next to it on the paper here. I'll add just a little more of the salt. So now we can make observations up close of the salt and the sand. You can see that they're similar in grain size, differ a little bit in color. If we look up very close, we can see that there are some regular shapes to the salt and not so regular shapes to the sand, but otherwise they're fairly hard to distinguish. Especially if we were to mix them up. So if we mix the salt and the sand up, now we can see it's even more difficult to distinguish. Now I'm going to pour the sand and salt mixture into a test tube here. I'm going to do that to make it easy by putting a crease right here on the end of the paper, and that makes it easy to pour into the test tube here. Now we can make some observations of the sand and the salt in the test tube. As you can see, they look fairly consistent. We're going to add water to the test tube using the wash bottle. I use the wash bottle to rinse down the sides, and now I'm just going to put my thumb over it and shake it up, which I can do since it's just salt water and sand. Make any observations you need to at this point. Now I'm going to set that aside, set my wash bottle aside, and I'm going to bring out my funnel. For the funnel, I'm going to need a piece of filter paper. I'm going to fold it in half and then fold it in half again, and I'm going to open it up like this so that I have an area that I can collect the sand in. Place it into the funnel like so, and underneath the funnel I've placed an evaporation dish. I can lower this down so that it doesn't have very far to go. Now I'm going to swirl this around and then pour it into the funnel. There's still some sand, and I want to get all of the sand out if I can, so I'm going to use the wash bottle again to rinse a little bit of water in there. And I may need to do that a couple of times, but I don't want to use too much water, because if I do, I have to get all of that water through the funnel and evaporate it, and I don't have an unlimited amount of room in the evaporating dish. Almost done, one more little bit. And that's pretty good. So now, as you can see, the water is dripping. I don't know how well you can see that. The water is dripping into the evaporating dish. You see it better there. See that there's only a little water left, and the sand is captured down at the base of the funnel. So all of our water has gone through the filter paper. If I was doing this quantitatively and needed to make sure I got all of the salt, I would rinse the filter paper, because the filter paper is wet with, of course, salt water. But I don't need to do that because I'm not terribly worried about getting all of the salt. Most of the salt is captured down here in the evaporating dish. The next thing I'm going to do is place the evaporating dish onto the hot plate. So I'm going to put it right here on the hot plate and wait until it begins boiling. While we're waiting for this to evaporate, let's turn our attention back to the filter paper. We remove the filter paper from the funnel, and we can open it up, and we can see the sand here in the filter paper. If we wanted to recover the sand, we could very easily put it on a warm hot plate or just leave it out until it was dry. We're not going to do that here because our hot plates are turned up on high and we would burn the paper. But we could very easily dry this out pretty quick with a warm hot plate. Look back at the evaporating dish, we can see we're starting to get some boiling. We're going to wait until the boiling reduces the amount of water and then look at it some more. We're getting down to have very little water left. You can see there's already salt starting to crystallize on the sides of the container. Might be difficult to see with the white container, but there's some salt there. It's almost gone. You can see that the bubbles are starting to get, oh, there we go. So it's spattering, but you can see the crystal starting to form around the bubbles. And now we're down to just the crystallized salt. At this point, we want to remove it from the heat. We use the crucible tongs and carefully lift it off, and it's totally okay to set this down on our counters here because they're heat resistant. We'll turn off the burner. Now we can take a look at our crystallized salt. It's still hot, but you can see the gritty nature of it here. Mostly stuck to the sides of the evaporating dish, but we can scrape some of it loose. So this is our recovered salt. And remember that we also had the sand recovered on the filter paper. As I mentioned, we could dry the filter paper if we wanted to on a warm hot plate and recover just the sand. Of course, this hot plate is still fairly warm, so it's going to singe our paper, so we don't want to do that. But here you can see how we got just that short few seconds, and we've already got our sand. We've already got our sand right back. Just with a little bit of quick drying. So we've recovered our sand and our salt here. Still kind of warm. If we look at our salt up close now, we can almost see that it appears to take up more volume than it did to begin with. That's not really true, but remember when it was foaming, we got it dried on the edges of the bubbles, so it looks really kind of flaky here instead of having the fine crystals like it had before. If we dried this slowly, we could probably get those fine crystals, but actually boiling the water gave us these flakes as the bubbles of the boiling water dried out. So it's much more flaky than it was before. Now make sure you turn to the back of your paper, and in addition to the observations and questions you've already completed, make sure that you answer the analyses questions at the bottom. There are 3 of them. The last one is a matching, where you're going to match the type of separation technique for each of the things that need to be separated. When you're done, you'll trim this in, and I'll grade it and hand it back to you to go into your lab notebook.